Welcome to Feminist Question Time, brought to you by Women's Declaration International, the leading global organisation defending women's sex-based rights against the threats posed by gender identity ideology. There's more information on our website, womensdeclaration.com, where you'll find our declaration on women's sex-based rights, which has been signed by 37,216 people from 160 countries and is supported by 518 organisations. We have many volunteer activists, including country contacts from every continent, engaged in defending women's rights. Do join us. You can also become a member, or you can donate or volunteer, or all of those things. Okay, so we're going to now move to Annaïg Birdy. So Annaïg Birdy is from Ireland. She's a 25-year-old lesbian and radfem activist working in the legal sector, and she's the co-founder of Not All Gays. And the title of Annaïg's talk is The Grip of TQ Plus Organisations on Irish Society. So thank you so much for coming, Annaïg, and over to you. Okay, so we're going to now move to our next speaker, who is Annaïg Birdy, and I'm going to get her up on screen. So Annaïg Birdy is from Ireland. She's a 25-year-old lesbian and radfem activist working in the legal sector, and she's the co-founder of Not All Gays. And the title of Annaïg's talk is The Grip of TQ Plus Organisations on Irish Society. So thank you so much for coming, Annaïg, and over to you.
I'm one of 9 co-founders of Not All Gays, which kind of was sparked just through discussions with myself and the 8 other members. There's 4 gay men, 3 lesbians, and 2 bisexual women, and we all have concerns about how our government is using LGBTQ to push through things like self-ID, which successfully passed in 2015, kind of pushed in behind marriage equality, and then the hate crime legislation that they are trying to bring into Ireland, which has no definition of the word hatred. And obviously, as a radical feminist and a lesbian, I have deep concerns about the lack of that, because it's up to interpretation then, and it's hate speech. The legislation is so dangerous. It will criminalize us saying that we want single-sex spaces, and will criminalize LGBs for saying that they are same-sex attracted rather than same-gender attracted, because we know that's not a real thing. And because it's up to interpretation, an individual's interpretation of what hatred is and what is deemed hateful. And as a lesbian who does not believe in gender ideology, I have been called hateful, as many other women have, for saying that lesbians are same-sex attracted. And so the concern would be then that LGBs would not be able to say that they are same-sex attracted, and because someone might find that offensive or hateful. And so that's why we set up the group. And also 4 of the 9 members attended one of the biggest, they call themselves LGBTQ, but it is just a TQ group, belong to, and they are consulted pretty much at every turn within government decision making. They were one of the groups, the NGOs consulted for the hate crime legislation, also the self-ID legislation, and which has, as many people know, led to males who identify as trans ending up in women's prisons. So it's all done under the guise of gay rights, but not the type. Our group name is that Not All Gays agree with any of this, or the use of gay rights and LGBT people to push through dangerous legislation that impacts single-sex spaces, sex-based rights, and the rights and protections of LGBT people. So 4 of the 9 of us belong to youth groups. I have done a presentation previously on the cult tactics used by Belong To within their groups. They have a huge impact on our schools. They have recently been awarded between 20,000 and 100,000 euro from the Department of Children for the expansion of their LGBTQ quality mark in schools, where 57 schools across the country have already signed up, accounting for 3,300 staff and almost 35,000 students. That's post-primary schools. Essentially, the schools have to pay 845 euro for an 18-month subscription to say that they are LGBTQ friendly, that they have to have pronoun signs up, and they're also taught not to tell parents if a child has self-identified as trans or non-binary. They Belong To will go into schools and essentially educate the teachers on how to hide such information from parents, which we as a group do not agree with. That is a huge child safeguarding issue. Lying to parents and parents not having any knowledge of what their children are going through in terms of identity is extremely dangerous, and it's all being done and promoted by our government, and supported and heavily funded in the guise of inclusivity of LGBTQ, and but it's the TQ lobbyists in Belong To that are pushing this mostly. In our time in Belong To, the four of us, we kind of attended the youth groups at various stages over maybe a decade or so. Our eldest member, he attended when gender ideology wasn't really discussed. It was just in the early stages of Belong To youth groups, and it was mostly gay, young gay boys and young adults, and a few lesbians would attend, but it was mostly gay boys. The child safeguarding issues at that point were inappropriate interactions, without getting, sued or anything. I won't go into the details, but there was inappropriate interactions between the youth workers and the teenagers. Then when I was attending in 2015, 2016, 2017, over this, it was, attendees were, they're all, it's a mixed sex group, and it's between the ages of 14 to 23, which is a safeguarding issue that simply wouldn't happen in any other youth group, if it wasn't got to do with gay and trans kids. You wouldn't have 23, 24-year-olds mixing with 14-year-olds. Why would a 23-year-old want to spend a Sunday afternoon talking about gender and sexuality with a 14-year-old? But there was several issues within that I noticed when I was attending. Firstly, there was no discussions of lesbians. If there was, it was trans-identified males saying that they were lesbian, and obviously I don't agree with that, and that was why I stopped attending, because even when I was on the other side of this discussion and very much did believe all of this as a teenager, I was about 17, I knew that lesbians did not have sexual or romantic relationships with biological males, regardless of how they identify. Two of our members did actually believe that they were non-binary at the time when they were attending Belong To, simply because it was promoted in Belong To that if you were in any way gender non-conforming, that you simply couldn't be just a camp gay boy, or just gender non-conforming lesbian, or in fact just gender non-conforming at all without being not a girl or not a boy. So that was kind of just promoted in Belong To, and they got 2 million, almost 2 million last year in annual income, with almost 500,000 coming from the Department of Children, Department of Education, and Department of Rural and Community Development. They are, when we were attending the groups, they would bring in certain politicians who also dealt as youth group workers. They would tell us to vote for them, that they, or get our parents to vote for them. If we were under the age of 18 and not yet of voting age, they would come in, kind of gain our trust as youth workers, and then would promote their political party around election times to try and get us to, ask our parents, because they were the party that were going to protect us and promote our rights as gay or trans identified young people. Again, that's quite concerning that adults would come in and tell vulnerable teenagers to vote for them after gaining our trust. But they then belong to, and the National Women's Council of Ireland and Trans Equality Network Ireland all signed. I'm not sure if people on this call are aware, there was a declaration to silence and not give political platform or political voice to women who were not towing the line of gender ideology. So any of the women's groups here who stand for sex-based rights and women and girls, they were signed off because the National Women's Council signed off on it, because now on their board, they have a trans-identified male on their board. He was also the chair of TENI, the Trans Equality Network Ireland, which is another heavily funded NGO, TQ NGO, that are heavily linked with Belong To. Belong To does donate to TENI and vice versa. And they are brought in for policymaking consults within the government about education, curriculum, health policies. During the monkeypox outbreak, when they were discussing the rollout of vaccinations, who would take priority, they brought in someone from TENI's board, a trans-identified female who has no medical qualifications, but she is the health advisor for TENI, and they brought her in, and then they went with the HSE's advice and people who are experts in viruses, and they took their advice, and then TENI was very upset that their advice was not taken and not taken on board about this rollout. They have just a hold on across the board, education, health, and then the youth groups obviously are a huge issue. When we were attending in 2015, 2016, they were pushing for self-ID, and they continue to lobby for reducing the age to under 16s, which that's crazy in our opinion, as not all gays. Just one second, I'm just going to pull this up. So when I was an attendee, the majority of the people that were, the young people that were attending, were dealing with eating disorders, very obvious eating disorders, or self-harm, or a combination of both. They would attend Belong To for a short while, gender non-conforming, at the age where you're trying to figure out your sexuality. And after a few sessions attending the youth group, then these young people who were very vulnerable and not receiving mental health interventions were identifying out of their sex. Predominantly the young lesbian or bisexual girls, because they were gender non-conforming, uncomfortable. Puberty's a rough time for most teenage girls, the changes in your body, and there was a huge amount of autism spectrum as well within those groups that were identifying out of their sex. and that was kind of, it wasn't ever really an option in Belong To, that, you know, it might just be that you're uncomfortable. There was no other option. It was just immediate affirmation. Promotion of binders was a huge issue as well, telling these girls with eating disorders and self-harming how to hide binders from parents, and how to saying get it delivered to your friend's house, um, wash it in the sink so it's not seen in your laundry if your parents do your laundry for you. And this narrative within Belong To, that they are the only safe space, that they, sorry, now I've lost my train of thought, that the outside world, including your family and friends, were, you know, against you, that potentially might disagree with you, not believe you, you know, not believe your identity, and but that Belong To is this safe space for you, that, which is entirely unreasonable, considering Ireland is very welcoming. We were the first entire country to gain marriage equality by a landslide vote. No one really cares if you're gay. It's not anyone else's business. Everyone's just, you know, there's the few people that are, there's always going to be a percentage that are homophobic, but predominantly Ireland is a very accepting country of everyone. And but Belong To pushes this narrative in schools, in the government, and in their youth groups, that the world is against gay people, gay or trans identified people, and that they're the ones that will protect you. This then can be seen with the hate crime legislation. Several of the senators during the debates, when it went to our Shanad, even if they were, even one of the senators who spoke about it, who is from a protected characteristic group within the hate bill, hate crime bill, she is from the traveling community, but her focus for her 13-minute speech was how it's so difficult for trans identified males to walk down the street. That is simply not true. But her focus was not on her own experience as a woman from the traveling community. It was about LGBTQ, focus on trans women and how difficult it is in Ireland for trans women. And then several of the senators just using LGBTQ to push through legislation that will prevent us from being able to actually state same-sex attraction, or, you know, that we want our own spaces as women and girls. And Belong To had a huge part to play in that. They're also using the gay rights narrative to push for surrogacy legislation, and it's coming in through quickly as well. They're trying to get that through. It's not looking like it will be by Christmas now, just at this late stage in the year, but they are trying to push it as this gay rights issue, which not all gays, the group, we don't believe that it's a gay rights issue. We don't believe that you, just because you are gay, you are entitled to use a surrogate and exploit a woman's body just because you're gay. But then let me just see. While we were in Belong To, just to note the rate of people who were identifying as non-binary or trans within the umbrella of trans, I'll just say, there was 16 people that I knew of that were trans or non-binary. 2 of the Not All Gays members included in that. Of that 16, only 3 still identify as trans, trans or non-binary. So that's an 81% desisting rate. Thankfully, the ones that did desist did not end up taking hormones because they were put on waiting lists. So some of them did go on waiting lists to get hormones at 15, 16 years old. And thankfully, because the waiting list was long and they had to go through a few hoops, they didn't end up getting on hormones or going down a path of medicalization and desisted before that. Belong to and Tenny both say that no one desists, no one detransitions. It's a tiny minority. It doesn't need to be discussed. That's the narrative that they are giving the government and schools, that you have to affirm. And because why would you? Because no one regrets it, which is obviously a lie from our own experience. And we know now from seeing all of the detransitioners coming out and speaking against it, such as Richie and Chloe Cole, Prisha. There's lots of detransitioners now speaking out against it, but the people who are consulted by our government when making decisions surrounding children, and specifically gay or trans-identified children, that it's Belong To that's consulted, and they tell our government that no one desists, that no one regrets it, and we absolutely have to affirm that we have to bring in self-ID for younger people, and to be able to give them gender affirming care. That's another thing that they are pushing for now, is gender affirming care for teenagers. It within Ireland previously, up until about a month ago, Belong To still had on their website that you can go to the Tavistock, which we know has had a closure order since July of 2022. But Belong To was referring people to the Tavistock, as was Tenny. Belong To also claims that they do not promote the use of binders, although up until, again, a month ago, they had a link on their page, on their advice page, on how to bind, and with links on where to purchase binders. So, which, if you go onto our Twitter, we will share the archive links to show this information. So and everything about Belong To, we've kind of discussed it a lot. The members of Not All Gays who were attendees and are speaking out against it. The hate crime legislation, obviously, hate is not defined, so it's up to an individual's interpretation. We've seen with similar hate crime legislation, such as in Norway, Christina Ellingsen and I'm not sure how to pronounce her name, Tanji. They were both under criminal investigation for tweets that they put out, and statements that they made that men cannot be lesbians. And so we have the same situation where, if hate is not defined, if we say no, lesbians do not have sexual relationships with trans-identified males, someone might see that as hateful, and I've already been called hateful and phobic for saying that. So then the Gardaí have the power then to come and seize all of your devices. If you refuse to provide your password or your devices, you face jail time for that. I believe it's up to 12 months if you are found guilty on that. And then if hate material, which can include tweets, memes, conversations, that you've had private conversations, and even if you have music that is deemed hateful of one of the protected characteristics, sex is not included in the characteristics, gender is. That if you have any of this hate material on any of your devices, you are facing up to 3 years in prison. And again, Belong To and Tenny are pushing for this, as is the National Women's Council, on the basis that it's protecting specifically gay people or LGBTQ people. And that's why we formed the group, mostly is because of this hate speech legislation, because we have hate crime legislation. Everything that would be an actual crime, such as assault, criminal damage, harassment are already criminal offences, and any hate element would be taken into consideration in sentencing such a crime. It would, get provided for a harsher sentence if there was a hate element to it. Any of the Irish people watching, that we do have on our website templates to write, templates that you can send to the government about the hate crime legislation and how it actually will not benefit LGBT people whatsoever. So if you want to go to our website, you can there's one for LGBT people, and then there's for non-LGBT people. We have two separate templates if you want to use that to send, because they're trying to get that in before the new year.
What's happened to the church? Because there were so many scandals. I sort of getting the feeling nobody went to church anymore. But do people still go along to the church? And what's the church think about all this?
So for anyone who doesn't know, the Catholic Church was basically had a lot of influence in our government previously, and then through all of the scandals with child sexual abuse cases and various other issues, the Magdalene laundries included, mother and baby homes. People, this is my perception of it, that people have tried so hard to pull away from the Catholic Church, to go, no, we don't want anything to do with this anymore. We want to stay away from that and the policies that they had kind of influenced, that now they've gone so far that it's gone to this without even realizing that it's just handing over to another ideological institution. I think it was trying so hard to get kind of not, gay rights, and I don't even know how to phrase it, just the opposite of what the church would have done, that they don't even realize it's actually rolling back rights for gays and women and girls, particularly, obviously, that they can't see that it's another ideology, that they just want to be as far away from Catholic government policy as possible. But it's just a new church. It's just a new Catholic Church.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much. I'm just going to check, because it looks as if we've got a couple of questions.
Yep.
We've got a question from Paula, which says, Annaïg, in the States, more parents are homeschooling due to this issue. Is there any evidence of a push towards this in Ireland?
I'm not sure if people are actually homeschooling, but I know that a lot of parents are concerned about sending their kids to school, especially with Belong To coming into schools. I know that a lot of mothers who are feminists, and that I know just from being involved in feminism over here, that when Belong To is going to be in schools, they do pull their children out those days or the week when they know that this kind of gender ideology is going to be brought into the school or discussed in school. They will take their kids out of school, which isn't fair to the child. They're losing out on time with their friends, socializing, and their education in general, just because they are so concerned about that their kids will get captured by this ideology, and that they're not being taught fact-based reality.
We're going to now go to Cathy Larkman, who is from Wales, and I'm going to add the spotlight. So Cathy is the coordinator of Women's Rights Network, a position she's held since the inception of this increasingly influential grassroots network of women. She is a former police superintendent, has championed issues affecting women and girls, and was a founder member of the South Wales Female Police Association, being named as one of the most influential female officers in the South Wales Police Breaking the Glass Ceiling event. Title for Cathy's talk today is The Gender Quotas Bill, Self-ID by the Back Door in Wales. Thank you so much, Cathy, and over to you.
It's just really important, really, that we get the message of what's happening in Wales across to as wide an audience as possible. We're a small nation, and a lot of what's been happening here has gone below the radar, really. It's a really familiar story, I think, to everybody that I'm sort of going to relate now. I'll try and be economical with the time, obviously, because of, a lot of fantastic information that's gone on before this. But we're certainly really encouraged by the news from our sisters up in Scotland, really, and the fight that they've had there as well, and how inspirational that is down to us, down with us here in Wales, really. We've got a similar fight on at the moment. That familiar story is the Welsh Government trying to change the very definition of women and attack our sex-based rights. And they've been trying to do this recently on the back of what's called a gender quotas bill. And the title of that has actually changed recently, and I'll sort of tell you the story of that. So we have a devolved government in Wales, for those of you who aren't familiar. I know there's a lot of my Welsh sisters in this talk, in the audience today. And that government won't listen to the women of Wales. Unfortunately, they are so assured of their hold on power that they can afford to show complete contempt for 51% of the population. And despite seeing what's happened in Scotland, they've decided to progress self-ID in Wales. It's a small government who want to display their progressiveness, or what they call their progressiveness, and have been prone to capture by ideology, really, and a small group of special advisors and lobby groups influencing them. Another problem that we've had really sort of attached to that is drawing the attention of the rest of the UK and further afield to that, because our own Welsh media, until very recently, have looked the other way, really, and ignored this issue. And we've then had the challenge, really, of engaging national media on this as well, when there's so much else going on. So, Welsh women and Welsh women's groups have had to galvanise, organise and try and disrupt the plans of Welsh Government, in an atmosphere where Welsh Government have, been employing the usual tricks, really, in terms of trying to shut us down and discredit us. So in terms of their sort of plans for self-ID, they've recently attempted to do this, or their first steps to doing this, via the back door, by way of a classic Denton strategy move, by tagging on the first steps of self-ID to other more popular legislation. So the legislation was a bill that purported to improve the representation of women in political life, which I've referred to as the Gender Quotas Bill, and in draft form originally was referred to by that name. But more lately, it's formally known as the Senedd Cymru Electoral Candidates Lists Bill. So we knew on the back of this, from conversations in the corridors of power, etc., that the intention of Welsh Government was to fully introduce self-ID in Wales sometime in 2026, perhaps backed then by a change of government who would, empower them to do it. But unfortunately for Welsh Government, there have been a number of obstacles to their plans. We've had a devolved administration here in Wales since 1999, when the National Assembly of Wales met for the first time, and Welsh Government sits at the seat of Welsh Government, which is the Senedd. It's important to state here, really, that Welsh Labour hold power in Wales and have done so since the inception of the administration in Wales. They're totally assured of their power base here. They're very comfortably in power. The last Senedd elections were in 2021, and re-elections in 26, by which time our First Minister, Mark Drakeford, will apparently have stepped down from political life too. But in the meantime, he's really busy ensuring he has a legacy to hand on. In terms of the Senedd, the Welsh Parliament, there are 60 members of the Senedd, 40 of which serve constituencies and 20 are regional representatives, and 30 of those are from Welsh Labour. So that equals its best ever election result, but also means that they don't have an outright majority, and as a result have a cooperation agreement with the Nationalist Party, Plaid Cymru, and they have a shared programme of work. Plaid Cymru are important in this because they share these same objectives and goals of Welsh Labour, unfortunately, and are aiding and abetting them in this sort of programme of work and the whole sort of self-ID thing. So one of the statements made by Welsh Government at the end of the published cooperation agreement was, and I'm just going to quote here, to make Wales the most LGBTQ+ friendly nation in Europe and support the publication of the LGBTQ+ action plan. And they also said that they intended to, quoting again, call for the powers to legislate to improve the lives and protect the safety of trans people in Wales to be devolved. So this has led to them introducing their LGBTQ+ plan for Wales. And it's not going to surprise anybody to know that, you know, I think Merched Cymru, another Welsh women's organisation, actually did an audit of that plan in draft form and in final form. You know, the LGBTQ+ plan hardly ever mentions the word lesbian. There's a few mentions of the word gay throughout it. There are, you know, rafts of mentions of the T throughout this and the Q, etc. You know, it's really what you sort of expect to see. But part of that LGBTQ+ plan is, you know, various different things that Welsh Government want to see in place or have put in place. One of those is a relationship and sexuality code for schools, which is hugely influenced by queer theorists, and that's mandatory in Wales right now. So the Gender Quotas Bill was originally meant to form part of a wider Senedd reform bill, which would, amongst other things, increase the size of the Senedd from the current 60 members to 96 members. But there were concerns for a number of years, albeit Welsh Government will play these down and say that they were finely balanced, and they weren't finely balanced. But there were concerns that whether they had the legislative competence to do this, because equalities legislation is a reserved matter in the United Kingdom, as Scotland have found out recently. Well done, Scotland. And the worry that the whole Senedd reform package would fail if it was legally challenged. Therefore, they separated out the gender quotas part of this. And within Welsh Government, they've had a small team working full-time on that gender quotas bill as well. So there's been a huge amount of officer time spent on this over the last few years, and a lot of sort of Welsh public money spent on this as well. So given the legal situation, you might be thinking, why on earth Welsh Government would press on regardless? Well, we know the conversations that are taking place is that they were banking on no one having either the will to challenge this legally, nor the, you know, the financial resources at a time of, you know, increased financial demand to challenge that and take it all the way. That seems extraordinary to say so, but that was their thinking, and it's very much linked in with a small government surrounded by a small group of special advisors, influenced by a number of lobby groups who are absolutely certain of holding power and being very arrogant in that power base as well. It's not going to surprise any of you now if I mention the influence of Stonewall at this point and other organisations on Welsh Government. You know, our government are one of the major contributors in the UK to Stonewall. You know, one of the, you know, the top, I think it's certainly one of the top 5 contributors to Stonewall sort of funds from external organisations. And you also have to bear in mind that any requests that women's groups have made to meet with Welsh Government ministers have been totally ignored or swerved. In 2022, I attended you know, publicly ticketed event at a constituency Labour Party meeting, and I went with Lisa Marie Taylor from Filia, where Lisa stood up and asked a question about trying to get Welsh Government to commit to meet with those concerned women's groups, and I recorded Lisa Marie at that meeting so they couldn't deny that it had happened. Mark Drakeford, our First Minister, was there at that meeting, and his minister, Julie James, in front of Mark Drakeford, in front of everybody else, and recorded by myself, gave a public commitment that she would meet with those women's groups, we were all named, you to reassure us and to have dialogue with us about our concerns about the direction of Welsh Government. Despite that, despite a raft of emails from all those organisations since, that hasn't happened. We've been totally ignored, and we've been, dismissed at every opportunity. And there's countless other examples of this. Loads of women's groups joined a meeting held by the Labour LGBTQ group, at which Hannah Blithin, one of the deputy ministers who's responsible for introducing the gender quotas bill, was present. One by one, every single woman taking part in that meeting, as she asked a relevant and courteous question in relation to the direction of Welsh Government and their consultation with concerned women's and LGB groups, was removed from that meeting for having the temerity to ask any question at all. Welsh Government only listened to women's groups who basically parrot the agreed line, and those women's groups, it won't surprise you to know, do receive funding from Welsh Government as well. So it's all sort of very, very much linked. Okay, so I've told you Plaid Cymru, the Nationalist Party, are fully on board with this as well. The position of Welsh Government, and they'll repeat it openly on the floors of the Senedd, is that trans women are women, trans men are men, and non-binary identities are valid. That mantra gets repeated several times, on the floor of the Senedd, and is quoted to us in written responses as well, and forms part of their LGBTQ+ plan. Hannah Blithin, the Deputy Minister for Social Partnerships, says, and I'm going to quote her again now so you just get a flavour of it, 40 years ago, gay and bisexual people were subject to hateful slurs and prejudice attacks. Trans people today are being subjected to a similar barrage of hate-fueled debates. We believe extending rights for one group does not mean eroding rights from another. We do not believe improving rights for trans women will damage rights for cisgender women and girls. Our trans communities are hurting, they're afraid, and they're experiencing harm. As a society, we can and must do better than this. So that's their position. So we had information from the Women's Rights Network, because I'm actually the Wales coordinator of the Women's Rights Network, but one of the early WRN coordinators overall. So we had information in early October, a gender quotas bill was going to come out for publication, and the Women's Rights Network leaked that bill in late October. We made the decision just to go public with it and get it out there, really. Features of that bill included that a list of candidates for future elections must be at least 50% women, but included a definition of women that basically stated that it means any person who is proposing to undergo, is undergoing, or has undergone a process or part of a process for the purpose of reassigning their sex to female by changing physiological or other attributes of sex. So you get the gist from that, really, that they were seeking a redefinition of women. The leaked draft also included the fact that Welsh Government were including within that an ability that they could amend the definition of woman at any time, and that no presiding officer in any electoral process could make any objection to anyone's declaration that they were in fact a woman. So a bill that was supposed to allegedly improve the representation of women in political life and ensure at least 50% of candidates on lists were women might end up with 100% of candidates on that list actually being male, which is completely crazy, isn't it? So as I said, we leaked that. And some good news from this, in that we had great coverage across national media generally, and we broke through Welsh media as well, who had been largely silenced on this as well. Welsh Government chose not to quote, other than to state they were still working on the bill. And interestingly, in the last few days, it was listed on the agenda for publication by Welsh Government in a plenary meeting under its new name. But in a sort of unprecedented turn of events, prior to the journalists' briefing about that, it was cancelled from it. So that's led to sort of a lot of speculation as to what's actually happened. And we've found out possibly what actually happened. And I'll just come on to that now really shortly. I am conscious of the time. But I just wanted to tell you
Cathy, there's no problem with the time. There's no problem with the time because we can carry on a little bit longer.
Okay,
so just
right.
yes, tell us everything because it's fantastic what you're saying.
Okay. Okay. So as I said, this is unprecedented for a bill to go onto the agenda, but to be suddenly pulled at the last minute. And journalists did sit up and notice this and found it really, really unusual as well. When we actually leaked the bill, we had, there was a response in the media from lobby groups, and one of the trustees of Pride Cymru defended the right of what she referred to as trans women to stand for election as their authentic selves. And interestingly said, there has never been an openly transgender person elected to our national parliament, and it is a glass ceiling that needs smashing. Well, I don't know how anybody else feels about this, but I don't think there's any glass ceilings within political life that need smashing for men to be represented. So it just seemed an extraordinary statement, but it's totally in line really with the thinking of the individual and the organisation forward. And Stonewall Cymru claimed not to have seen the draft bill, but were supportive of it, which would come as no surprise to anybody at all. And in fact said that they thought it was unfortunate and concerning that the bill was leaked and mischaracterised to further perpetuate a negative narrative against the trans community. So all these organisations within Wales are totally concerned with, the T and the Q. They're not concerned with the LGB at all. So why has the bill been pulled? I don't think it's been pulled indefinitely. I think this is a pause rather than a complete cessation, I have to say. And there's been different theories on why the bill has been pulled, but interestingly, there has been an article within a Welsh media outlet today which confirms our suspicions, really, and claims to have had this information from a highly placed political source at Welsh Government. So the presiding officer of the Senedd is called the Llywedd, Elin Jones. Her party politics are the Welsh Nationalist Party, Plaid Cymru. And the Llywedd is required on publication of a new bill to make a statement that she accepts that Welsh Government have the legislative competence to bring it in. Extraordinarily, really, for a bill that's been developed, and people have been working on it for a number of years, it doesn't look as though Welsh Government have actually perhaps had discussions with the Llywedd about whether she was going to, in fact, support that bill before they put it on the agenda. But her role is to protect the reputation of the Senedd. And the recent media report has made it clear that she has potentially listened to her own legal advisors and declined to announce that bill, and that's why that's been pulled from that agenda meeting. So the presiding officer, the Llywedd, does not feel that Welsh Government have the legal competence, allegedly, to bring this bill in, and as a result of which has refused to announce it, and that's what's caused it to be pulled. I also think that the enormous stink that's been created by Welsh women and the various groups sort of fighting both the gender quotas bill and, the full sort of self-ID picture that Welsh Government are going for, which include obviously the Women's Rights Network, plus, our sister groups, Merched Cymru, Get the L Out, Outspoken Women, the various resistors groups and LGBT Allies Cymru and Labour Women's Declaration, during which we made it really, really clear that those feelings that there wouldn't be a legal challenge, we negated those and made it very, very clear that we were ready to mount a legal challenge to that bill the moment they published it. So, strong fighting talk, but with backup as well. And we think that enormous stink has possibly, we hope, meant that the presiding officer, the Llywedd, has really taken those legal responsibilities and that legislative competence issue very, very seriously. So if that hadn't happened before, you know, she has sat up and thought, I am possibly going to have to explain this issue in court and why I sort of, you know, allowed this bill to be published. So basically, you know, careers and political integrity then are probably on the line, aren't they, really? And, you know, thankfully, we hope somebody has taken that seriously. So that's the position at the moment with the gender quotas bill. Will it be back? Unfortunately, I suspect it will be back. I think Welsh Government, if they don't work on it and reword it and bring it back soon and potentially work on the Llywedd and the legal advice, etc., then they may play a slightly longer game and wait for a change in UK government. And, you know, and if there's a change and there's a UK Labour government, they may bank on that government not wanting a confrontation with a very safe Welsh Labour government in place and approach UK Labour then for a devolution of equalities powers so that they don't end up in the courts in the same way or in the trouble in the same way that sort of Scottish government did. You know, that is a real possibility for what may happen and a real concern. So the influence of the UK political parties is really important for us here in Wales, really, in terms of the direction of travel this takes. You know, will UK Labour want a confrontation with Welsh Labour? You know, so it's important for us in terms moving forward, really, that we keep that spotlight on the Welsh Government, not just Labour in terms of the ruling party here, but Plaid Cymru as well, who have now had, you know, within the last few months, have had a new leader who we don't know what his position is, but his predecessor, Adam Price, was, you know, totally up to his neck, really, in gender ideology and completely supportive of it. So there's a lot of work going on to try and influence the other parties as well within Welsh Government and specifically Plaid Cymru. And definitely the national situation is hugely, hugely important of us. You know, it undoubtedly they're going to follow the lead of Scottish Government and try and sell this line as an attack on their own devolved powers and the authority of Wales, etc. We are already seeing that narrative played out sort of loud and clear. And in the meantime, it has to be said that for the last few years, you know, a soft version of self-ID has been operating in Wales, you know, and all those organisations that are linked to Welsh Government via, you know, funding in part are capitulating by changing internal policies and processes, really, you know, and operating a system of self-ID. There are no domestic violence services, rape crisis services in Wales that operate a sort of sex-based, a clear sex-based service. You know, when you dig into all their policies, they're all accepting sort of self-identification, which is really, really concerning. So we have huge amounts of battles here in Wales, but we have got some excellent women's groups, and the best thing for us really here is as much spotlight as possible, really, from everybody, you know, to ensure that this is forced out into the sunlight, really, and receives attention, because Welsh Government have been very much operating under the radar, you know, and being arrogant and complacent that they can do this without any sort of scrutiny. So them being subjected to scrutiny on this has been really, really uncomfortable, and we need to keep that going. But in a nutshell, Welsh women and Welsh women's groups and LGBT groups are fighting this hard now, and we'll continue fighting it. So thank you very much. Diolch yn fawr.
Where do we stand now, further to Scottish legal judgment this week confirming validity of Section 35 procedure taken by the UK government, which I think you sort of mentioned, but if you could answer that, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, Welsh Government are in a really sticky wicket in relation to that, and you know, we've been drawing their attention not only to that, but the sort of judgment in relation to the representation on public boards. Stuff that happened in Scotland as well. You know, they've just been ignoring it, really. They've been I can't say they've been in blissful ignorance, they've just been ignoring it. And the legislative situation in terms of devolution, you know, Wales are on even more tricky ground than Scotland, really, in terms of doing this. You know, I'm no constitutional expert by a long shot, so I won't, you know, talk through the Government of Wales Act or anything like that. But suffice to say, Welsh Government are in even more tricky waters with regards to that. But the announcement yesterday, really, in terms of the Section 35 arrangements, etc., with Scotland, I would hope that that's landed really hard in Welsh Government. But who knows? And who knows? You know, they've been very much characterised by a willingness to just ignore this and hope that they can just push it through under the radar. And I think they're banking as well on, you know, UK Labour eventually not having the will to challenge them. It's just extraordinary, really, that it's happened. But if you bear in mind they've had clear legal advice that they didn't have there was high risk, they didn't have the legislative competence to do this anyway, and they've had that legal advice at least for a few years, and they've still done it. It gives you a sense, really, of how arrogant and how complacent Welsh Government actually are, you know, and we can't afford to take our eyes off the ball in relation to that, or feel comfortable that they'll take any notice of what's happened in Scotland, because they haven't so far.